Welcome back to Celebrity Radio. It's Alex Belfield here, talking to an innovator, a legend, and a top man as well. Hank Marvin, how are you?
Alex, I'm fine. Thanks for the lovely introduction.
Well, it's so nice to talk to you because you're something unique in show business. You created something brand new. You made it your own. You created a sound. Congratulations, firstly.
Thank you. When we started in this business, and I know you've interviewed Cliff and he probably said the same thing, we didn't really anticipate such a long career because everyone was telling us that rock and roll would 2 years it's all over, mate. We didn't really believe them, but because we were sort of 17 years old, you tend to think everything will go on forever, but we didn't really think that at say 40, 50, 60, 70 we'd still be playing rock and roll music.
Do you think it's the skiffle roots? I mean, I look at your career and how it started, of course, the Drifters and then into the Shadows. All the guys who seem to come from that background, I look at Liverpool, we look at the Beatles, it seemed to be a certain type of passionate music that stayed with you.
Yes, I think so. In my case, and I can really only speak from personal experience, before the skiffle movement happened, I was already interested in New Orleans jazz and folk blues music, people like Sonny Terry, Brownie McGhee, Leadbelly, that sort of stuff. And of course, when skiffle came on the scene, I loved that. Lonnie was a very good entertainer, Lonnie Donegan that is, and I enjoyed his early records very, very much. And I could see the connection between the folk blues work song bass and what he was doing. So that was an easy thing, an easy step up into this new skiffle thing, which I really enjoyed, and I couldn't wait to start playing it.
When did you realize you had not only a talent but a gift, and that you were able to turn that gift into a career?
Gee, that's a hard one. We came to London, Bruce Welch and myself, in April 1958, trying to get into the music business. It was a very centralized business in those days. Everything was in London, agents, management, recording studios, etc. So that's where we felt we had to be. And I don't think we thought we were overly blessed with talent. We thought we had something. We weren't quite sure what. And as things developed and we started playing with Cliff, and even before then, I guess, down the Two Ice Coffee Bar, we were getting some compliments on our singing and our playing. So I suppose that was encouraging, but still not really feeling we were, we'd see other people who, in our opinion, were probably better singers, better guitar players. And it wasn't really until we met Cliff, I suppose, and started working with Cliff that we were able to really establish ourselves through initially the Drifters and start developing a sound. And for me, that would have really happened, I think, with the Stratocaster. I got my first Stratocaster. Cliff very kindly bought that for me in 1959, about the spring of 59. And that was the instrument that made things happen for me, because it had a, if you want me to stop talking about this, I can stop now, but if you like the story, I'll continue. It had what they call a tremolo arm. What in reality is a vibrato bar, because it gives you a vibrato, not a tremolo. And I found that with this little piece of equipment, I was able to put a vibrato on these very heavy strings, which sounded lovely, made the guitar sing more. I could dip a string, hit a string and dip it down like a singer might with a note in a song. I could give it a good shake and give it some dramatic sound, as I did at the beginning of Man of Mystery, things like that. So all this was a part of this developing something different, something new, getting some kind of expression out of the guitar that no one was able to get before without this little device, and no one seemed to be using it that I heard from the American records. So I was very happy to try to come up with something a bit different.
It was as if you could bend a note, and that sounds strange because a note is a note, but you did something new and it was different and it took off and caught on. I know you were inspired by many people, but many people have been inspired by you since. Is that the greatest honor of all, that people have heard what you do and think it's so good they want to do it themselves?
I think that is the greatest flattery, isn't it? Obviously every one of us would be flattered when people say they like what you do. It's natural, it's encouraging for us to be commended. But when people go so far as to copy, and then years later when they have then developed a style of their own, as some of these guys have, like say Brian May or Mark Knopfler or Jeff Beck, that means even more, because they're still saying it. They don't have to say that. And I think that is certainly a praise indeed, and I really appreciate it. It's very good for my ego. They're making an old man very happy.
An even greater compliment to your talent and your ego is the fact that you're asked to make a new record, and that's why we're here today. We're going to talk about the Cliff years, we're going to talk about your life and your career, but let's start here, 2014, this new album. What a nice thing that you're making it, because nobody's making money in music anymore. They must believe that you have a product that's going to sell, and it is doing. Congratulations on the sales already. I mean, it's doing incredibly well.
Thank you. Yes, it's entered the chart this week at 10, which is good. The thing is, of course, to try to keep it there or move it up, but we'll see what happens. But it's an encouraging start. Alex, I was approached over 18 months ago to do this album, and I wasn't able to do it at the time for a number of reasons, and I had to turn it down. The record company came back a year later and said, look, we still want to do this project. Are you able to do it this year? And I thought, yeah, I can see my way this year. And it was great fun approaching it, because to me, all of these albums are a challenge. And what I like about it is that I'm given the opportunity to interpret someone else's songs that for the most part have been big hits. And my idea is always to, first of all, get the feel of the song itself, and then try to develop an approach, arrangement-wise, something's different from the original. And once I've got that established, and we record the tracks, basic tracks, then I play my guitar parts onto the record. But and that takes me a little while in the studio, because there are so many different ways you can approach these things. Which register do you play it in? Do you play it low, high, halfway, midway, etc., etc. So these things you've got to work through. Do I bend this note? Not bend this note? What? I'm overcooking this one. It's too ornamented, and this sort of thing. And gradually, I get the feel I want, and then I'm happy. It's a bit like doing an oil painting. So it is quite a challenge, but a very enjoyable challenge, and particularly when it all comes to fruition, you get everything there you hear, all the drums, the percussion, and you've got a record now. It's good.
How do you know when to stop? I always wonder that about you guys. When you listen to it and you tweak it, and then you listen to it again and you tweak it even more, there must be a point where you can over tweak it and you can ruin it. Do you internally sort of feel when it's done?
Try to. It's not an easy one, because I'm sort of wearing two hats. On the one hand, I'm the producer. On the other hand, I'm the artist. And as an artist, you can tend to be indulgent. You do something, that sounds really good. I like that, But what you have to do is sit back and go, does it really enhance this track? Is it adding to it, or is it getting in the way? And sometimes you just have to own up and say it's actually not enhancing at all. It's getting in the way. It's all right. It sounds like a flash phrase, but it does nothing. Get rid of it. So that's the difficulty sometimes of doing that. The other thing is, you say, tweaking, Alex. And this can happen when you're adding things like percussion or keyboards or, I don't know, whatever it might be. There's always a tendency to add more and more. We could do something here. We could do something there. And often it's the old adage, less is more, usually works. Fun enough, a track in question was a track called Daydream we've done, the old Love and Spoonful. I've always loved this song and their version. It reminds me of a kind of an old, almost 1940s jazz song, And so when we did it as a very basic arrangement, and once we got the basic track down, the group, my guitar and everything, there's the thought, right, let's maybe put a little bit of brass on or something here, or some voices here. And I discussed it with my son Ben, who did 9 of these arrangements, including this one, with me. And we thought, no, it's got a charm with its absolute simplicity. Just like a basic little group with a guitarist in front. Let's leave it at that. That is the charm. Start adding this, that, and the other, it will become overproduced, and as you say, you just tweaked it a tweak too far, so we thought we'd leave it. But you're quite right, it is not an easy one to know when to stop.
I wish people live would think about that as well. Often the most magical moments of any concert, if you saw Elton John, would be just him and a piano. You don't necessarily need the band. We're coming to see you, and as much as your ego probably loves the lights and the showbiz and the rock and roll of it, we just want to see you sometimes and hear you play.
That's true. And I think probably the last 40 years, we started to get more and more carried away with production. big production shows where the music almost takes second place to the visual impact of the show. And just on that tack, Alex, I have a little gypsy swing quartet in Perth, 2 gypsy acoustic guitars and bass and wonderful accordion player who did 5 of these arrangements incidentally on the new album. And we've done quite a few shows in jazz clubs, jazz festivals. Did a little tour in New Zealand last year of 9 concerts. And the point you're making about lights, we wanted to have a simple lighting show, just very simple, not distracting from the music at all or the presentation. We'd all sit down for this music. And the first night, the lighting guy was very upset that he couldn't press all his buttons to get all the flashing lights. He truly was. He was really upset. And, you know, we got the most fantastic reaction, standing ovation every night, which proves your point. People are basically there, all right, they want to see the artist, obviously, so you need some lights to see them, but they want to hear the music and they want to have that interaction, that contact with the artist. You don't need all the flashing lights and all the gear. Not at all. And so I think we can certainly start relying too much on production and not enough perhaps on the quality of our personal interaction and engagement with the audience.
We're going to talk more about your album later. It is wonderful. It's perfect for this time of year. It's upbeat and it's summery. That is the intention of it, and it certainly fulfills that purpose. Let's go back then to the beginning and your relationship with Cliff, because this interests me. I interviewed Frankie Valli a few years ago and Bob Gaudio, and I asked who was the genius, the voice or the guy who wrote it. And something that always fascinates me about the psychology of performers is when one person is more famous than the other, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're more talented. Did it ever bother you that Cliff's name became bigger than the Shadows and almost bigger than the records in some cases?
Well, not really, because we have to keep in mind when we joined Cliff as the Drifters, we put the band together, that Cliff was the star, if you like. It was Cliff Richard and in Smaller and the Drifters. So as far as we were concerned, we were his backing group. Although I have to say that the relationship was not like that at all. It was more like a 5-piece band because Cliff didn't separate himself from us. We traveled together on the same bus. We used to stay in the same digs or hotels as we got more money. We would go to restaurants, movies together, party together, write songs together. That was more the relationship in the band, a 5-piece band. But at the same time, we knew that he is the star. And okay, once we started having our own success with as the Shadows, quite independently with the hits from Apache onwards, that put a different slant on it because we could go out and do our own tours and pack places out. But you know, we still had to recognize that Cliff was an enormous star on the world stage at that time, and that didn't bother us at all. I tell you a little funny story. We were touring somewhere and we had to arrive and be interviewed, and Bruce fell asleep in the plane. His hair was sticking out all over the place. He wanted to do something, and so we haven't got time. And he said to David Bryce, who was our tour manager, he said, listen man, I'm a star. And quite seriously, and David Bryce said, well, twinkle, twinkle. At which point, everybody, including Bruce, had to see the funny side of it and laugh, you know. But look, on the whole, we didn't have a problem with Cliff. You know, we had to acknowledge, and I was very happy for him. To me, he was a star. He had the success, he had the personality, the charisma, and he was a nice person. He backed it up, you know, and he was hardworking. He wanted to improve himself. He constantly worked to improve his singing. If they asked him to dance, he'd try to learn to dance, you know. And the amount of work he put in behind the scenes was enormous. He deserved every success, really.
And when you look at where he's at now, does it still fascinate you that week by week he's still in the papers and people are still curious about his life? And it is a fascinating thing, the Cliff Richard story, isn't it?
Yes. Look, as I said, the guy has been a huge, probably, you know, in terms of a solo music star, one of the biggest we've ever had on the world stage. Still going strong. And, you know, when you think that Cliff came with the success Cliff had early on in his career before the Beatles, you know, on the world stage, that was enormous before people like Rod Stewart came on, like, you know, the end, 1970 or something. So I think the enormity of his success shouldn't be overlooked, but I think it also says something about the eagerness of the public and indeed the media to want to know about people's private lives and about celebrity in one way, which is very sad. You think they'd have better things to do, as should the public. But on the other hand, I guess in a way, it shows that there's not truly terrible things happening in their lives. Otherwise, they'd be looking elsewhere, you know. But I've never really understood this absolute obsession with celebrity and their private lives. I cannot understand it. I think it's just pathetic, to be honest.
Do you think you had the halcyon days in a way? Because when I look at your success in your career and your longevity, I can't imagine there being another group that's going to repeat your success. It's almost not possible now, because I look at who's famous and for what reason. I mean, the front page of the newspaper today is Justin Bieber. We're not going to be talking about him or playing him in 20 years' time. He's just the latest celeb that's going to be destroyed by the tabloids. And then there'll be another one. You did have a career, which so few have now. It seems as soon as they get started, boom, they're gone.
Sadly, that is often the case, and I think we live in a very much a throwaway world these days. And as you say, with the power of the media, they can destroy a person's career. They can also make it. With all the hype they're willing to give in certain situations and the publicity and so forth. But sadly, with some of the excesses some of the young guys and girls get up to, it's not helping them, you know, in the eyes of, particularly when their audience is a very, very young audience, and you've got parents who, hang on, should my daughter or son be buying this guy's record, going to see his concert? He's immoral, he takes drugs, he's disrespecting people in public, he's rude, he's vulgar. I don't think so, you know. So all these things come into play. But having said that, there were quite a few artists, obviously from our era and way down the track. I mean, the Beatles, for example, certainly Paul's the only remaining one who's really, but, you know, what a great career and what an enormous story in terms of fantastic songwriting and such like. The Stones are still the most amazing band. Remarkable. It's almost like everybody's got to go to see the Stones, which is great for them, but they're still around, very much so. I saw the Hollies a few months ago in Perth. They're still around. Sadly, only two of the originals left, but good band live. You know, they sing well, they play well. And then you've got someone like Elton John, who came on the scene, really started to break at about 1970, I guess, in the UK, but what a great talent again, you know, great singer, a larger-than-life personality, good writer, and that guy's been around forever and will be, no doubt. And I suppose there were quite a few. You mentioned Rod Stewart before we started recording. You saw, there's another guy, great performer. And you know what I think is lovely about that he was persuaded to do those American Songbook things, that he didn't want to do it. And that, as he said, saved his career in a way. But, you know, a lovely little sequence of CDs that he brought out there with all his great standards and such like. But just a little note, it's interesting, Cliff did something like that on his second album with several of those sorts of songs. You know, he did 6 with Norrie's orchestra and 6 with the Shads. And we thought it was a bit far out at the time. It sounds a little bit, you know, because we wanted to do rock and roll, and we thought it was all a bit wimpy to do things with an orchestra. But I guess Norrie was a bit ahead of his time there, wanting Cliff to do something like that, show another side of him, the romantic balladeer, you know.
Let's talk about the days when you were at the peak of your fame and that everybody was interested in the Shadows and Cliff and you. How hedonistic was it? How much fun was it? Were you able to enjoy it as much then as you remember it now? Sometimes when you're in the heat of a moment, it can often pass you by. Were you present during all of that, or was it just one big haze?
No, it wasn't a haze. We went into drugs or anything like that. So we do remember lots of things, which is important because, let's face it, lots of things to enjoy. Probably lots of things to forget too, but it's part of life's experiences. Look, being famous for us was kind of bizarre in many ways. And we as the Shadows were a little fortunate in that I think with Cliff, it came upon him very, very quickly from Move It, really. He was thrown into the limelight. We had a more gradual development into our fame, playing behind Cliff, becoming the Shadows, starting to appear in lots of TVs with them, audiences then knowing us as individuals, shouting our name on stage, people recognizing us. It was a gradual introduction to fame, and then of course the success of Apache. So that was very helpful for us. The fame can be very enjoyable. I think it was more enjoyable in those days than it probably is now, because there was no paparazzi in those days, no people, photographers following you around, people trying to dig the dirt. It didn't happen in those days. So you could still be extremely famous, as were some film stars, etc. Go to restaurants, go to a club, wherever, and people would recognize you, sure. But you wouldn't have all that stuff with, 20 photographers outside the door, people following to the shops. It didn't happen. So life was much easier in that sense. So the fame was enjoyable in the sense, in a number of ways. In one way, obviously, it was helpful in your career. The more famous you are, the more tickets you sell, I guess. The more people are going to listen to your new record. But also, little perks in life, like going to a restaurant and being given sort of VIP treat. Mr. Marvin. I remember one stupid occasion, my wife Carol and I, about 1967, 68, we'd had to go to somewhere in Surrey, and on the way back, I said, listen, let's stop off and have a bite to eat. It was Kingston, actually, on the way back. I said, let's have a bite to eat, because it'll be too late when we get home. So we saw an Italian restaurant, and I checked my pockets. This is before, credit cards. I'm like, no, I've only got whatever it was. I said, look, we'll have to be very careful with the menu, and because we would not be embarrassed. So we went to this restaurant. We looked carefully, we chose something, and the manager says, Uncle Marvin, wonderful to see you here. It's nice to have you in my restaurant, all this. Blah, blah, I love your record. Anyways, this went on. So the bill came. He said, no, you're not going to pay the bill. It's all on me. It's all on me. And of course, if we'd known that, we could have had something a bit better. But that was quite funny. But this is the kind of thing that happens, I don't know, you get priority with like theatre tickets or something. So look, there are definitely perks in being famous, and I think it was better to be famous then probably than it is now, in terms of that you still had a private life.
It's always fascinated me that the more famous you become, the richer you become, the less you pay for. It's just one of those life's ironies, isn't it?
Look, this was something that hit home to us in the early. As soon as we became famous, well, even behind Cliff, people wanted to give us amplifiers. Before we couldn't afford them, and they wouldn't give you any discount. Now they want to give you them, and they want to give you guitars. That and this has gone on through it, and it is an irony. It's like tennis players. The more famous they become, more successful. People want to give them clothes and give them $1 million for wearing their watch or something like that. If they're not famous, they've got to buy their own clothes. It's the people who need it don't get the help, do they? And that's the sad thing of our society.
I had to smile in Las Vegas this time that the DJ Calvin Harris is now getting $250,000 for playing other people's records. I thought that was an interesting irony. Not even his own records, other people's. And that's show business, isn't it? If you've got the pull, they'll pay it.
Exactly. Is this a sponsorship from record companies, by the way, to help them to like payola in a sense?
I'm sure it must be something like that. Yeah. We've not even touched the sides today. There's so many questions I wanted to ask you. I could sit here for another hour. I did a survey with myself earlier, and I've come to the conclusion by majority that Apache is probably the greatest guitar record in history. Am I off there, or am I more or less on target?
I think it's been some great rock. I think of that era. A record I thought was a cracker was Albatross by Fleetwood Mac, the beautiful record. And I found out later on, talking to Peter many years down the track, that in fact he started life off copying me in that. That sounded a little bit like it on that record, but what a beautiful record. Classic. Look, I'm very proud of Apache. I think it was something that it just happened for us. Everything was right. It was the right vehicle. The music was right. We played it correctly, got the right feel on it, and it had the right sound, and it was wonderful. And it's still one of my favorite tunes. I don't know if it's if it's the best ever guitar instrumental, but it's certainly one of them.
And as for you now, Hank, is it great being you? I can't imagine there's any greater place to be in your career than still relevant, still present, still doing the business, and having that incredible history to look back on with absolute success. You're one of the few people in show business who's never been tarnished. I don't see anything bad in your career. That's an amazing achievement.
Yeah, I'm glad to say that. Look, I'm very happy to be me. I'm never going to be anyone else. It's about how much I want to be. I used to want to be Arnold Schwarzenegger, but I didn't have the time in the gym. So I'm very happy to be me. It's I'd like to be a better guitar player, and that's an ambition. Always had an ambition to improve, and that's true. I found out of most of my peers. We want to keep on getting better. Just a little story, by the way. You mentioned early on the original Stratocaster. It was so important to me. That is now in the hands of Bruce Welch. And this is a funny story. I've got to say this because we're doing a series on this. He borrowed the guitar from Cliff in 1968 and never gave it back. And he used to say, Cliff gave it to me. And Cliff said to me, he said, I didn't give it to him. He borrowed it and never gave it back. And we finally got the true story from Bruce on the Cliff and the Shads reunion tour. Brian Bennett badgered him until he finally owned up. So I said, you stole it then. He went, well, I didn't steal it. I just didn't give it back. So I'm starting a rumor now that Cliff is going to give the guitar back to Cliff out of his shame and remorse, who will give it to me.
There you go. I'm sure Cliff can afford a new one if he really wanted one. Hank Marvin, it's a real pleasure seeing you. Thank you so much for talking to me today. And your brand new album is in the stores now. We could have done another hour. Congratulations on everything, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alex. It's been really terrific to talk to you. Thank you.